And we actually met for the first time since 1990 with the ambassador to the Russian government. And I bring that up because at the time of the JFK assassination, the KGB had actually come forward with their own independent investigation, and they actually gave it at Kennedy's funeral to U.S. officials. We never got those documents, and it's my belief that the CIA actually destroyed that information and evidence because it would have confirmed what the KGB. And mind you, at the time, JFK was actually in talks with the president of Russia at that time, and his perspective is that he actually wanted to do a joint mission between the U.S. government and the Russian government to the moon. And there are aspects and divisions within the intelligence community. You obviously saw the Cold War was happening. They wanted war in Cuba. They wanted war with Russia. So for them to be able to say that Kennedy, who was not a communist, but that he was a communist sympathizer, and how dare he talk to these dirty communists. I mean, that in itself would have given them any ammunition to turn a blind eye or at least not fully figure out who assassinated Kennedy. But I bring that up to say that, when you have these people in power, you can see a lot of it in regards to, there's a summit on the 15th actually with President Trump and Vladimir Putin. And I think the aspect of, anytime you have peace and trade, it's way better than war for everyone involved, for the people in Ukraine, for Russia, for the American people. And I think for the surrounding regions, like I recently got back from meeting with government officials in Romania and Moldova. And it didn't matter and I actually met an actual member of the Moldovan government who was a communist, like an outward communist. And it didn't matter who I talked to, everyone wanted peace. And then when we had met with the European Parliament and the EU, some of them wanted peace, but then the countries that had the shittiest economies, excuse my language, they were the ones that were advocating for war. Well, you have a war-based economy, it always helps your economy. So if you have terrible policy perspectives, obviously you would advocate for something like that. But it just goes to show that the people that are going through it, the people that are living it, that are directly impacted it, no one would advocate for war. And so in even just having this conversation, a lot of people, even, administration ago, maybe 2 administrations ago, probably would not have had that conversation. But to be able to develop that dialogue, the end result of that meeting was the Russian government agreed to release their investigation onto JFK that the previous congressional task force in the 90s had tried to obtain from the Russian government, and they said no. So they agreed to release that, and they'll be posting it publicly for the American people to go through later on this fall.
Have you seen it yet?
I haven't. No. So I'll be seeing it at the same time everyone else does.
What do you think is in there, if you had to guess?
So when I was talking to the ambassador, he's actually a history buff too. And so he had actually said that the Russian government, when Oswald was actually in Russia, had done a psychological profile because they thought, they're like, is this guy part of American intelligence? Like, what's his story? And they thought he was basically nuts. And apparently he tried to go hunting when he was out there, and they were observing him, and he couldn't shoot for shit. So they're like, he didn't meet our psychological profile. Then he shows up to the Russian embassy in Mexico City with a gun, and they're like, what the hell is it? Like crazy guys showing up at that? Like, what's going on? And then we find out simultaneously as this is all happening that the CIA, kudos to Director Radcliffe, had actually released something called the Joanides file. And George Joanides was actually, he's basically our version of James Bond, but more corrupt. And he was basically observing Oswald. He had lied to Congress. This was all in his file. He was then the CIA liaison to Congress during the investigations, stonewalled their investigations, was later awarded something from the CIA. So we have the CIA admitting that they lied to Congress, covered up the assassination attempt, or covered up the investigations. We had admissions from the Warren Commission, people that had been subject to the Warren Commission's investigation, saying that the Warren Commission engaged in witness intimidation. They omitted evidence. The single bullet theory never exists. The CIA admits that Lee Harvey Oswald was not a lone gunman. People ask, well, does this mean that you'll ever get the name of who killed him? No, because I don't think the CIA was like, kill JFK on this day and use this gun and have this person assigned. Right. But there was evidence of multiple shooters for sure.
Well, there had to be multiple shooters. There's injuries, like one of them was to the front of his neck.
We had testimony to that.
Yeah.
And actually, what's interesting is when we first launched the task force, we had left-leaning news outlets that were trying to write hit pieces saying that I was basically launching a conspiracy theory task force. And they had to print the truth weeks ago. You can actually pull
what is it about people that don't want to believe that some conspiracies are real? Is it a comfort thing? Is it you think you're gonna erode trust in the government? Is it you just have such a rigid worldview, and in your mind that there's always been Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, that's what happened, and because of that, anything that challenges your belief system, you fight against?
Well, specifically to JFK, for decades, the intelligence agencies were influencing what the print and press was doing.
100%. Until Geraldo Rivera. You know, when Dick Gregory brought that film on the Geraldo Rivera show, and you got to see the Zapruder film, and you got to see what looks like a shot that makes his head go back and to the left.
Yeah, and
which
reaction
would indicate he got shot from the front. I think he got shot multiple times by multiple shooters from multiple different directions, and I don't think necessarily Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't in on it.
Well,
here's the problem. People say, oh, Lee Harvey Oswald couldn't shoot. You don't have to be that good with a rifle to be, you're on a ledge, so you have a secure rest. If your rifle's sighted in, and they said his scope was off, but that doesn't mean shit, because you could just drop your scope and it's off. Like, all you have to do is take your rifle off of that ledge, drop it on the ground, and now that scope is off. You never drop your gun like that, and if you do, you can knock your scope off.
Well, there's multiple problems, though, because the Warren Commission actually never even put into the report, right? So, like, if you're
But let me finish. Okay. My point is, that wasn't a far shot. It was like, what was it, 140 yards from the book depository with a scope?
Yeah,
and
he
a
should have been able
rifle
to take
with
the
a rest.
shots.
No, you could kill a guy like that, and he could have been the shooter.
Mm-hmm.
He could have been one of the shooters. But I think there's too much witness testimony. There's too much evidence. The whole idea of the magic bullet theory was just because they had to account for all the wounds in the bodies with just 3 bullets. And they found a guy who got hit in the underpass rather. He got hit with a ricochet.
Yep.
Yeah. So now they knew that bullet couldn't have hit Kennedy or Connolly. So how do you attribute all these wounds to 2 different guys from multiple gunshots to a single bullet?
It's a magic bullet, don't you know?
You have to find this bullet that fucking for sure didn't hit any bones. And there's more fragments in Connolly's wrist than there were missing from the bullet. The bullet looks almost pristine. It looks like they shot it through like feathers, or they shot it into water, which is what they do when they do ballistics tests on rifles.
Well, what's interesting is the Warren Commission did omit multiple female witnesses who were actually at the book depository that day that actually stated that they had never witnessed Oswald actually in the location or going down the back of the book depository. So that's an interesting fact.
Yeah, it's possible that he could have snuck past them. There was a lot of chaos. You hear gunshots, the president shot. People don't always think straight when things are going nutty. People have a terrible memory right after traumatic events.
Yeah.
Like, yes and no. Like, he might have been there or he might not have been there. He might have shot at Kennedy or he might not have shot Kennedy. But for sure, he was some sort of government operative. For sure, he was traveling back and forth from Russia. He married a Russian citizen. There was a lot of weird shit.
He was under surveillance by the CIA, so there's a lot there. However, I will say this. What the official narrative was, we now know is BS, right?
Yeah.
And
that I thought from the beginning.
Yeah, but a lot of the American people did, but to have their own government say, no, that's not true, to gaslight them and to push this narrative of if you question it, you're wrong, you're crazy. That in itself, I think when you're talking about like why do the American people not trust their government, it's really this fracture that starts around the Kennedy era and time frame. And you can see then that distrust kind of evolves. But going back to your original question, why do people refuse to kind of question conspiracy theory? Maybe there's some substance to it. And I think it's because it's more comfortable for people from a psychological perspective to live in this comfort area that their government might not do something like that.
Right.
Or might not try to cover up something like that because that's just an easy way of life. But look,
it's too scary.
It's too scary. But the fact is that, look, I've traveled a lot. I've dealt with a lot of world leaders. We are still the greatest country in the world. Make no excuse about that. But it doesn't mean that we can't call out and hold our own government and officials accountable. And so that's kind of what guess my mission has been this Congress and what I hope that it will continue to be. But I'm not trying to do this for like even the next 10 years. So for someone like me, people are like, oh, initially you're going to ruin your political career talking about this. This is crazy. Why would you even want to do that? And then, they're seeing all these big wins coming out in regards to transparency. And I will say, had it not been for the secretaries that have been appointed by this administration, this wouldn't have happened because under President Biden, he actually also tried to declassify things pertaining to JFK, and the National Archives never released it. And so in addition to...
That's not a good sign. None of that stuff's a good sign. Like, if you want trust from the American people, you release information. If you want us to distrust you, you hide everything. And you're hiding
Exactly.
everything on one of the most important events.
Because it's still, it was written by the KGB. But at the end of the
Yeah, for
day,
sure.
we have a good mosaic that's been put together with at least the documents that have been released with this administration. And for any outstanding documents, I actually have a team assigned to me from the CIA that is actually helping me chase down these documents. And I've already had some interesting experiences, like not creepy, but for example, after President Trump signed the executive order, and Radcliffe has been super helpful, we actually were made aware of this. Allegedly, there had been a document that was at the CIA that was a report from the Inspector General that had implicated the CIA allegedly in the assassination of JFK. So I'm following up on this lead and trying to find this report. And the archives is like, we don't have any documentation of this. The CIA says they don't have any documentation. And they've been good with us so far. So I go to the archives because they're like, we found this weird bag though, and it's in the skiff, and it's been here for 5 years, and it was left by our former attorney for the archives, and so we don't know what's in it. And I was like, well, go open it. They're like, well, we don't have the key, and it's in a vault. And I said, well, I'm coming over. So I drive over, literally, I put my son in the car. I get in the car and I go over to the National Archives. We go into the skiff. I pull out this bag and I'm like, does anyone have scissors? And we cut open this little folder, and there was a CD-ROM in it, and this has again been declassified now, so I can talk about it. But there was this CD-ROM of a ton of wires from the State Department. Some of the wires were pertaining to the Kennedy family, and it was actually a WikiLeaks document. And so I think the reason why it was kept at the archives is because you're not actually supposed to have these documents on government computers. WikiLeaks obviously don't happen with that. But here I was cutting it out of a bag at the National Archives.
That makes sense that you would have the most top secret documents burned on CD-ROMs. That way no one could ever get access to it by hacking into your computer.
To this day, I don't know even who left the CD-ROM. I don't know. And there was some other stuff in that I don't need to get into. But
why don't you need to get into it?
Because I don't want to get in trouble. But the stuff that was on there was interesting. And I think I saw recently Tulsi had actually talked about some of the State Department wires that had been found and I think these are the same ones that had talked about the assassination of RFK. There were wires going up from the State Department prior to his assassination, which is interesting. So our next investigation, so we've done multiple hearings.
What do you mean by that? How did they specifically discuss it?
Well, I haven't seen the actual wires themselves yet, but what that would imply is that the State Department knew about the assassination before it took place.
Oh, geez.
So, and that was something she talked about.
Did you get into the MK Ultra stuff at all with Jolly West?
So I look at that on my free time, but that's not the purview of the task force. But there's stuff that you can, again, CIA.gov/reading room, super creepy. I did find a document on the archives website that actually ties the initial phases of the MK Ultra program to Operation Paperclip.
Oh, boy.
Interesting. And
that makes sense. Right?
It is there, and I'm reading this to my husband.
Because for sure, the Nazis were experimenting on drugs with people.
They're doing a lot of bad stuff.
Oh, they were doing a lot of horrible stuff. But for sure, they were experimenting on their soldiers and on prisoners, and they were experimenting on all kinds of people.
Creepy stuff.
Yeah, and if we took some of that and applied it, the Jack Ruby connection to it is that Jolly West went to visit Jack Ruby after he shot Lee Harvey Oswald. And Jack Ruby was pretty rational before then. And then after Jolly West leaves, he's freaking out, seeing things that aren't there. I think he said something about Jews he could see Jews burning alive.
It's a psychosis state.
Full on,
state.
Lost it. Most likely got dosed the fuck with acid. Most likely Jolly West just hit him with a fucking giant...
That's a terrible way to go.
...shot glass of acid. It doesn't, he went so far off the deep end. Then he died later. I think he died a few years later of cancer, but I think he completely lost his mind after Jolly West visited him. And Jolly West he was involved with the Manson family thing. He was involved with Operation Midnight Climax, where they had brothels. The CIA was running brothels, and they would get these Johns to come in with the prostitutes, and the prostitutes would give them acid, and they didn't know it. And so they were sitting there, and there was two-way mirrors, and they were filming them. Why these guys were well, for blackmail, for observation. They knew these people were never going to say, hey, you did that to me. Look what the government did. It dosed me up with acid. Because they're not going to admit they went to a brothel.
Well,
so you have like the perfect group of people to victimize and just try stuff on.
Well, and they got in trouble for it too. Like the CIA had to do payouts. They were getting sued for it. And then when all this did flush out, I mean, it's always, I feel like
the Freedom of Information Act was the only, and then they found a bunch of documents. They found documents that were, I forget, Tom O'Neill, who wrote the book Chaos, goes into great detail about this.
Well, it's interesting.
It's all about the Manson family and MK Ultra. It's a fantastic book.
Well, even just this conversation right now, there's such a stigma that exists around it because it's such a spooky topic.
Yes.
And so it's
and
like
you don't want to look stupid.
You don't want to look stupid. And so look, anyone watching this can go look at this information. Go to cia.gov/reading room. And no, it's not going to be a phishing website that's going to steal your information. But you can find.
Oh, for sure it is.
The CIA is like, where are we accessing?
For sure.
But it's always been one of those things, and if people ask me, I'm just very transparent about it. And I will say something that started out with a stigma of being, this conspiracy theory investigation, wasting taxpayer dollars, has been arguably one of the coolest task forces in Congress, I think. And we have a lot of good people that are behind it. And
I think the tide is turning on that kind of thinking, that these conspiracy theories are silly to pursue. Like some of them, yeah. Some of them are silly.
Some are crazy, but some are
crazy.
True.
But that doesn't mean that some are true. Also, there's a time-honored tactic of taking... Look, if I was an intelligence community, and I'm not accusing anybody of doing this, but if I was an intelligence community and I had some truth that was very inconvenient to a narrative, and I wanted to label that truth as being a preposterous conspiracy theory, I'd add a bunch of kooky shit to it.
Or have disinformation campaigns.
Or dole it out to the nuttiest people on the internet. Dole it out to the craziest people. This guy's got a drinking problem, and he's got a conspiracy theory website.
Or take a little and spin it.
Him.
Yeah.
Get it to him and tell him you're helping him out. You're going to give him some inside information. Get him to spread a bunch of kooky stuff so that when that stuff gets disproven, the other thing's attached to it, so the other thing looks stupid too. And that's what I would do.
Yeah, we've had our fill. Like the one thing I wanted to do when I first got the task force is open up a skiff to any person who held a clearance to come brief us on what they knew about UAPs. And I can tell you that we've now had
what was
the
the first conversation like when the door shuts and you're like, oh boy, I'm
gonna
get the goods?
The problem is I've reached out to some of the biggest names in UFO lore. Okay, and they all got skiff flu, and we call it skiff flu, meaning like the day that the skiff was open that we reserved it, we're like, we're here, like come on, come brief us. They get sick or
and
their dog dies.
And they didn't recover and come back?
They didn't recover, and then they just don't talk to us anymore. So
they ghost you?
They ghost us. Yeah, so I'm like, well, if you're not going to tell me to skiff, then you're full of crap.
Or you're scared for your life because you're just a scientist who doesn't, maybe they got threatened. Maybe someone let them know that maybe someone hung something on their door in the middle of the night.
But if people say they're going to go tell us in a skiff and then they don't show up, it's a problem, right?
Well,
so they've already gone public.
But maybe those people don't feel like the government's going to protect them.
That is one of the biggest things that we've had people bring up is that you're a whistleblower, but whistleblower protections only go so far, and you can't do anything for my physical safety. And some of them do allege that there's these actual physical concerns. We actually had someone that we wanted to bring in to testify because our next hearing on UAP is going to be, I believe it's next month. And the individual that was actually told to us by David Grush is actually a former combat controller. And so my husband, Air Force Special Operator, combat control. But so we knew the guy via some friends. So we knew that the guy wasn't nuts or crazy, and reached out to him, and he did not want to come in. He wanted nothing to do with it, was like, I'm not touching this. And so, that stuff like that happens.
Well, also, you put those folks on TV, right?
Well, we don't have to. We can do private, but if we testify...
If it comes time where they have to testify,
yeah.
And there's a lot of time in between people finding out that this guy came and told you guys what's up to testify.
Don't freak out our witnesses, Joe.
But that's the problem. This is why what I was talking
now.
About is what's being advocated in the documentary that to me makes perfect sense is mass amnesty. Now, here's the bad part. For sure, you're dealing with enormous sums of money, and I'm sure people got really rich off of that, and I'm sure it's super illegal. If it's real.
The back engineering potential?
Yeah. I mean, and also the competitive advantage you would give company A if this company gets access to a down craft that can traverse space and time, that can move through the universe instantaneously, that utilizes an unknown element, that has some unknown process of defying gravity. It's utilizing no interior mechanisms of control. Everything is done with the mind of the pilot. If this is the truth, if this is what they're saying, and these are the kind of things they find, that getting to a contractor would be a massive advantage over the other contractor that also should be on equal standing with the government, right? They both make jets, they both make whatever it is. So it's like, what do? Do you divvy up your spaceships in between these folks? Like, are they the only ones who get to know it? And then how do private contractors, how are they the gatekeepers of the most important information in the world, if it's true?
Well, and that brings us to what happened at Eglin Air Force Base. So in a nutshell, we had been told Representative Gates had come forward and said that he had two or three pilots that had contacted him saying that the Air Force was covering up information regarding to UAP activity in the Panhandle, and he wanted us to go with him to investigate. So we show up at Eglin Air Force Base. We're met by the base commander. Previous to us even showing up on this congressional delegation to investigate, the Pentagon had tried to cancel the meeting. And you can't, so this was under the last administration, so you can't just cancel a meeting and say you can't come to the base. That doesn't work. So Gates actually was on House Armed Services at the time that oversees the U.S. military. And so Gates got the chairman involved, calls back onto the Pentagon, gets this meeting on the books, and at the time,
I like it when people use a movie.
Easy way or the hard way. And if it's a hard way, you're going to have Representative Gates and Luna in D.C. questioning you. So I suggest you do the easy way. So he actually, in the middle of the meeting, we were kind of holding his feet to the fire on it. He kind of got nervous as we were talking to him, and I kid you not, he goes, they're going to like that I'm not going to let you see this. So he kind of was thinking out loud, but didn't realize that he was basically saying it. And then in the middle of our meeting, he gets up and leaves the room. I have to go to the restroom or something. And then maybe 5 minutes later, this tech sergeant comes in and says, oh, the base commander's been authorized to go on leave to Georgia. He won't be coming back. And I'm sitting there looking at Gates and Burge, and I'm like, he just left in the middle of a congressional delegation? That's never happened.
So he said out loud, they would be happy that I'm not telling you?
Yeah, verbally articulated it. Gates was there. My husband was there.
But here's the
Burchett
thing.
was there.
It's just if that guy's, he's in a powerless situation, right? If he does give you access,
he's gonna get in trouble.
He might be really in trouble.
But here's the problem. He can't, even if it was someone at the Secretary of Defense, right? Because at the time, this got pretty high level.
I'm not saying it's not illegal.
Yeah. He still, at the end of the day, you're in the military. How our government functions is the military does not decide what the civilian sector and what representatives can and cannot see. It's not supposed to function like that. So he got up and left. I've never seen this happen. I was in the military. I've never seen, in the middle of a congressional delegation, these are big deals. You just get up and go and leave to Georgia and you just don't come back, in the middle of the meeting. It never happened.
What state were you in at the time?
We were in Florida.
Oh,
he just,
that's hilarious.
get up and, drove to Georgia. What the hell are you doing in Georgia in the middle of a congressional delegation?
I'm going fishing.
See ya. And then his second in command comes in, and they managed to get one pilot to come down and brief us. And what I will tell you is, I will say it, Representative Gates has gone on record. He actually did as soon as he left office that we've seen stuff that I don't believe was created by mankind.
So you can't tell us what you saw, but
I'm gonna let you infer.
See, this is the problem that I have with all this stuff.
I should be able to tell you without losing my clearance.
Well, not just that. That people that have that information should give that information to the general public.
Correct.
And stop treating us like you're smarter than us and that you can handle it and we can't. That's silly.
Which is why we have to declassify, which is why...
You know the Hal Puthoff stuff?
No.
It's okay. Hal Puthoff, during the Bush administration, was assigned, he was one of many scientists, and this is also in the age of disclosure. He was one of many scientists that was assigned to put a numerical value to pros and cons of UFO disclosure. So they said to him, we have a crashed UFO that we have been back engineering, and we want to release information to society to let people know that UFOs are real, and that there is something else out there that's not us, that's much more intelligent than we are. So they have this list of pros and cons: banking, religion, societal structure, everything on one side. And then the pros, whatever the positive aspects of it would be. And every single scientist said that the cons outweighed the pros. And he said, I would have loved to have had disclosure, but this was just what they asked me to do. They asked me to compile numbers and to do it in a way that's super objective. And he said, if I'm doing my job, this is where I think it would completely wreck our government, completely wreck any idea that the people that are in charge of us have any position of authority. When there's something that can go 100 million times faster than we think is physically possible through the universe, appear out of nowhere, stop all of our nuclear programs, shut down bases, do weird shit.
But don't you think that that's where kind of it's been interesting, because society has moved away from this aspect of like having a spiritual grounding and even believing in, like, you know, most people today, I think when you talk about like praying, even that whole concept is kind of just like, oh, you know, they're just... And I feel like that thing's kind of poo-pooed, but if you have like a grounding in that, and going back to what I was saying earlier, I think that that's not like, I don't think that society would do that. Granted, I'm not a scientist, I'm not running numbers, but just based on how we've kind of been evolving with access to information and kind of the questions, the discussions that have been happening, not just here, but I think internationally, I just think a lot's changing. Now, to say that we were, you know, and I've heard some wild theories, like people think that, you know, humanity was seeded by UFOs, and that's I don't agree with that theory. I'm going to address it because
it's a fun one.
It's an interesting theory.
If you found out it was true, would you tell everybody?
I mean, I'd be transparent about it, but I just like don't personally believe it.
But would you believe it if you found out that was the information?
I mean,
that the government had.
Well, I'd put it out there because that's what I'm
right.
supposed
But what
to do.
would that do for your belief system?
That would suck.
But would it suck, really? But maybe that's what's confusing about the Bible. Maybe what's confusing is that it was an oral tradition for hundreds, if not 1,000 years before it was ever written down, right?
Well, I think that it depends on what book you're talking about, right? So, like,
but I
if you have
mean, the
books
Old
written by
Testament,
prophets.
if you go back to the oldest works of the Bible, weren't most of those stories handed down generation after generation and then eventually written down?
Written into text. Well, some of them are written by prophets, and then, but I mean,
Right.
Enoch is apparently supposed to predate even the time of Genesis and talk.
The nuttiest one is Ezekiel.
I'm telling you, Enoch is even crazier than Ezekiel.
Oh, I've read. I just don't. Did you find anything about whether or not Enoch is controversial?
You can look up the 4th century.
It was discluded as, well, I guess, since the 5th century. It wasn't in canon.
Sorry, 5th century.
And why did it get discluded?
It says the Jewish scribes or the priests didn't believe, the rabbis didn't believe it was canon.
Huh.
So it's regarded as scripture.
But what's interesting is that even if that's the case, though, you have the Ethiopian Orthodox Church that actually there's Ethiopian Jews, and that's considered the most pure form of the Bible. So, like, you actually have a division of like the Ethiopian Jewish class that actually recognized Enoch.
How weird is it that some rabbis 500 years ago made a call?
But that's what I'm saying is like you
1,500 years ago,
can't though
made a
discredit
call.
it because
That's kind of weird.
But you can't discredit it because, again, like when you have people removing books, I think, look, and I'm not telling people what to believe. I'm just saying you should take a look at it.
Oh, here it is. The main reason for the Jewish rejection of the book is that it's inconsistent with the teachings of the Torah. From the standpoint of rabbinic Judaism, the book is considered to be heretical. Another reason for the exclusion of the text might be the textual nature of several early sections of the book that make use of material from the Torah. For example, Enoch is a midrash of Deuteronomy 33. The context, particularly detailed descriptions of